Red Bank Women's Club, and we're just overwhelmed with people pouring into the meeting, looking for kindred souls, hope, and compassion. We still have those qualities in abundance, and I have to tell you that this is the most well-attended meeting that we've had since that night 3 years ago, which tells me that everybody is energized, desperate, and hopeful. So, thank you so much for being here. Before we get to the nuts and bolts of the debate, I just want to make a few announcements. Our March meeting will be on Monday, March 2nd, right here at the same time, 7 o'clock. And our voting committee is going to provide the program, and it will focus on important Senate races nationwide, because unless we change this Senate, we're not in good shape. And also focus on voter turnout and redistricting issues. There's going to be hands-on activity to prepare letters to go to Kentucky voters to help defeat Mitch McConnell. Ellen Herman has said that the phrase "ditch Mitch" is going to be our bylaw. Also, there's a special event this coming Sunday afternoon that we encourage you to think about attending. It's the annual Luncheon for the Source, a program at Red Bank Regional that has done remarkable work with the Dreamers who live here in Red Bank. The best of the best. So they'll be selling tickets after our forum. Tickets will also be available online, and there's a flyer on our website's date page. Ellen? Pardon me?
And there's flyers on the back of the table also.
Oh, okay. Flyers on the back of the table, the back of the room. Also, we have petitions in support of professional licensing for DACA recipients that are available at the back of the room. And if you would like to sign tonight, that'd be great. But if you want to know more and then sign, there's information that we can get to you about, and a lot of it will be in our next e-blast. Just want to give you a quick update from our holiday giving project. You are the most generous people that I could ever imagine. Total donations for the holiday project were $1,424. We divided it among 3 programs right here in the area. The Warming Center at Pilgrim Baptist Church, which provides shelter for homeless men on nights when the temperature it really dips. Thank God that hasn't been too many nights this year. $471 for Planned Parenthood, and $527 to the Dreamers Lobbying Training, which is a trip they take to Washington every year. So in addition to that, you've donated an amazing amount of objects. We were able to donate 5 feminine toiletry bags to Planned Parenthood, 20 winter survival kits to homeless people or I should say, homeless, susceptible people who go to JBJ's Soul Kitchen in Red Bank, and then baskets full of hygiene products for the homeless people who live in the Panhandle Hotel in Eatontown. So thank you so much. It was just wonderful. So let me tell you how we're going to do things tonight. The candidates picked numbers, and the person with the lowest number will go first. There will be for each of the candidates 10 minutes to introduce themselves. We have 2 timekeepers over there who will be very strict, right? Now when I ask the questions, they get 2 minutes to answer, and then if there's a need for some follow-up questions, there'll be 2 minutes for the follow-up also. For closing remarks, there will be 3 minutes each. Now, people have given us some great questions, so I'm going to work them into my schedule of questions, and that's it. as Susan said, I'm sure everybody's going to be respectful. I have no reason to think otherwise, and let's get started. So, number one was Stephanie Schmid. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Schmid, and I'm running for Congress here in the 4th District. I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I know we have folks who traveled all the way up from Ocean County. Thank you for coming on up here. I promise we're going to get down there and do something. I want to thank the Greater Red Bank Women's Initiative for having all of us here. And I also just wanted to acknowledge our former fellow CD4 primary contestant, Hassan Shahade, who's here tonight, really just showing everybody what democracy means and what our party is. Who am I and why am I running for Congress? So, as I said, my name is Stephanie Schmid. I've spent my life as a human rights advocate and defender. I am running for Congress now because I believe that our country is at a crisis point and we need more leaders who understand what is at stake, working together in Washington to ensure that our democracy remains strong, that our human rights are protected, that the rights of some are not held above the rights of others, which is something that I believe our current representative does on a regular basis. And I have a little bit of firsthand information about that. I have known Congressman Chris Smith for over 23 years now. I got my start in foreign policy and human rights work in Washington, D.C. in the summer of 1997 as a high school student on a fellowship program with kids from all over the country who came to learn what our government is about and how the system is supposed to function. And I carry those lessons with me today. And through this nonpartisan program, I was assigned an internship in Congressman Smith's office on a basis of geographic proximity. So a Jersey girl met a Jersey guy, and that's where I thought the story ended, because we really don't agree on much. But that summer, I got to work on the House Foreign Affairs Committee doing work on things like the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act 1 year later, Guatemala and Honduras, what is driving the flow of immigrants to our southern border, religious minority persecution and human rights violations in China. If all of these sound like current event topics, it's because they are, and because many of the most pressing issues that affect us today have been unresolved over the past several decades by career politicians like Smith in Washington. And that's one of the reasons I'm running for office. So after that summer, I went off to undergrad at Yale University. I majored in political science and human rights work, focused on women in politics, specifically writing my thesis on the Violence Against Women Act. I know that is a bill that is near and dear to many people in this room, and it's also a piece of legislation that our current representative refuses to reauthorize. After that, I went to law school out on the West Coast at UC Berkeley. I continued my work on violence against women and did a lot of immigration and asylum work. And that work was incredibly meaningful for me because I got to see firsthand the impact of the American dream. People come to this country from all over the world with hopes and dreams like many of ours, and they enrich the environment and fabric of this nation and of our economy. And some of the proudest work I got to do as a young lawyer was helping refugees apply for asylum and obtain legal status in this country. So those issues continue to be incredibly important to me, including helping our dreamers and continuing the DACA program. I practiced law for 5.5, 6 years in private practice and as a federal law clerk in Manhattan on the Southern District of New York, and out west again in Seattle. I like to move around a lot in my 20s on the Ninth Circuit. And then it became very clear to me that in order to really do human rights work and be an advocate, I needed to go into a policy field and work for the federal government and serve my country. And so I joined the United States Foreign Service in 2011. I swore an oath to protect and defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think about those words every day. And I had an amazing career at the State Department. I deployed to Port-au-Prince, Haiti after the earthquake and spent 2 years there working with their parliament, their political parties, and their electoral officials to make sure that Haiti had free and fair elections that were long overdue. I worked to elect more women to the Haitian parliament, and I developed this specialty in sort of strengthening democratic foundations, working with other countries' legislatures to make sure they could build vibrant democracies like ours. And if you asked me in October of 2016 what I would be doing with the rest of my life, the answer was be a U.S. Foreign Service officer and diplomat. It's the greatest privilege of my life to serve our country. And I've had firsthand experience seeing what failing democracies look like, not just in Haiti, but in Brazil, when they impeached their president and folks rioted in the streets. But then our election happened in 2016. And regardless of who won, what is very clear is that the process was flawed. Our election was interfered with by a foreign power, and America can no longer hold itself out as a democracy, showing other folks the way in how to hold free and fair elections. And so I had a real crisis of faith, both personally and professionally. I lasted 16 months in the Trump administration. I finished my work there in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, where I worked with now Congressman Tom Malinowski and others to try to protect the human rights of all. I can say that we were only moderately successful in stemming the abuses that are now coming out into the news. I watched senior diplomats and women of color, our first LGBTQ rights envoy, be forced out of their jobs. The expertise of folks who had served under multiple administrations be ignored. And then in the spring of 2018, I sat there as large portions of our annual human rights report were deleted. These reports are authored every year by Foreign Service officers around the world, and they're the foundation of what our immigration judges use when they're adjudicating asylum cases, of what journalists and NGOs use, and other countries, quite honestly, to assess the situation on the ground. And we erased the experience of women seeking access to reproductive health care in sub-Saharan Africa. We deleted the experience of women fleeing violence in Central and South America with their families. And we erased large portions of the struggle for marriage equality around the world. And so I knew if I wanted to claim to be a human rights advocate, that I could no longer stay silent and work in this administration. I resigned my commission in the Foreign Service and went to the Center for Reproductive Rights, where I led their U.S. foreign policy program, and we fought back against these attacks. I sued the Trump administration twice over the deletions of the reporting, particularly around reproductive rights, under the Freedom of Information Act. And I led a 100-member coalition on Capitol Hill with groups as diverse as the American Federation of Teachers, Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, to fight back against these attacks, and wrote a bill called the Reproductive Rights or Human Rights Act, which would permanently ensure that no future administration can hit the delete button on human rights data and reporting in this country and around the world. And I'm very, very proud of that work. But that brought me full circle to my old friend, Congressman Chris Smith, who, it will not surprise you, is one of the leading opponents to my bill in the House, who is fighting tooth and nail to ban access to not just abortion, but birth control, both here in the US and overseas, through destructive policies like the global gag rule, and who does not believe that our gay brothers and sisters are entitled to the same rights as the rest of us in this room. And so I'm running for Congress because I believe it is time to have somebody elected from this community that represents all of us, that will fight for all of us, that will do the right thing and make sure that we look back on this moment of history. We knew that CD4 is a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. And I'll just close by saying that nobody should be in office for 40 years. And if we re-elect Chris Smith, that is exactly what is going to happen. We deserve so much more as a community. We deserve so much more as a country. And I am firmly committed to term limits and other mechanisms for ensuring that the next person in the next generation that comes up behind me is standing here before you, not too far in the distant future, because I'm not a career politician. And I think you've heard I have a lot of dreams and ideas and places to go. And I think together on this journey, we can beat Chris Smith. I think I am the right candidate to do this at the right time. And I ask you for your support. And then I just want to thank my fellow candidates here for being up here. This is a really hard thing to do. It's been a pleasure to get to know Christine and David and Hassan and Jim and Tiffany. And I really, thank you all for being here and participating in this process, because we all are better off when there are more informed voters and decisions taking place. Thank you.
Next up is David Applefield.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm David Applefield. I'm grateful for the opportunity to meet you, to speak together here in Red Bank. I want to thank Joanne Dinson, Sue Ellen Sims, and the Greater Red Bank Women's Initiative for a full house tonight in this great Two Rivers Theater. I am really delighted to be here. They say talk is cheap, but they're wrong. Talk is precious. Talk is dialogue, and we need dialogue now more than ever. Conversation is how we listen and learn from each other and discover ways to compromise. We need dialogue now, at a time when confidence in government and in our elected officials is at an all-time low. And anxiety about the future of our country, about our lives as citizens and residents, is at an all-time high. We're at a serious moment in our history. What kind of country do we want to be? What kind of democracy do we want to build? To answer these questions, we need to start right here, in this room, in Red Bank, in Tinton Falls, in Point Pleasant, in Freehold, in Manchester, in Hamilton, in all of our 43 communities in our district. I believe as Americans, as citizens of New Jersey, there's a lot more that connects us than divides us. Whether we've been here for generations and generations, or whether we've only been here for a few months. We all want the same things. A fair chance at building a better life for ourselves and our families, and hopefully our neighbors. We tend to think that the work of a member of Congress is about voting on federal legislation in Washington. But it's more than that. It's about being present, right here in NJ4, where we live and where we work. We send our elected representatives to Washington to work for New Jersey, for our people and our communities. But for years, a lot of years, 39 years, our district has been deprived of fresh thinking, deprived of creative energy, deprived of new economic opportunity. This has to end, and we can do better. We deserve better, and we have the talent to prove it. If I have the honor of being your next congressperson, this is what I see as my first line of responsibility: to restore faith in public office. Our most valuable resources are right here. You, our talent, our youth, our imaginations, our belief in ourselves and our neighbors. I want NJ4 to mean something, to be a strong, positive, and unifying force, built on local business, relying on local talent, and inspired by local leadership and local vision. We each have a voice. We can have an impact on how we change the present and shape a better future with intention and purpose. We need an elected official in Washington and right here who knows how to listen. I'm a communications professional. I have a 30-year career in journalism and media. I work with thought leaders and business leaders and global organizations to meet challenges and to solve problems. I listen and I work to find solutions. This is what I do. I fix things. For over 20 years, I've worked for the Financial Times newspaper in Europe, in Africa, in the Middle East. I've published reports on youth employment, combating diseases, alternative energy, conserving water, supporting women entrepreneurs, promoting strategies for impact investing, exploring new technology and innovation, and a lot more. I'm also a small business owner and a family man. I have a publishing house based right here in Red Bank, a few minutes from here, where I live with my wife, Julia, and our recently adopted black lab, Ramses. I was born in Elizabeth. I lived in Livingston. I studied at Amherst College. I went to grad school at Northeastern University in Boston. We have 3 grown kids. Alex trains social entrepreneurs in poor communities. Anna is a registered nurse in rheumatology and geriatrics. And Ernesto, our bambino, is a professional soccer player in Austria. My mother came to New Jersey as an 11-year-old child Holocaust survivor. She lived in Rahway and in Bradley Beach. She became a psychiatric social worker, and today, at 84, she continues to give talks in schools, in churches, in community centers on how to say no to hate. My father was a public school teacher from Union. Both of my parents graduated from Rutgers, and both have helped me be the person I am today. To me, the essential issues that demand our attention are affordable and accessible health care and medication. No one in America should have to compromise their health or their well-being. No one should have to choose between putting dinner on the table and filling their prescriptions. Quality education. It starts with paying our teachers what they deserve and providing them the resources they need, from preschool to elementary school, from high school to college and beyond. There's nothing more important than investing in our children's future. And climate change. We must protect our environment before our tourism, our agriculture, our shoreline, and our communities are destroyed. While we build awareness, our environmental challenges can also serve as a vibrant source of opportunity for our district. A smart response to climate change can mean new jobs and new economic opportunities. It all comes down to our plans, our ideas, and our new approaches, our enthusiasm for change, along with our ability to solve our most urgent issues. How to move forward out of this gridlock while generating dialogue and establishing trust in a new era of moral leadership. The how is what I know how to do, and I'm honored to be here tonight. working to earn your vote. Not only do we need to replace the incumbent in November, we must revitalize the role of our next member of Congress. Together, I'm confident that we can transform our ideas into brilliant results. I thank you. I welcome all your questions. We can fix this if we talk.
Next up is Christina Conforti.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Gratitude all around for the Greater Red Bank Women's Initiative, the beautiful Two River Theater, particularly to Susan Meltzner, who was a key organizer, who would be slightly overwhelmed, encouraging new voices and new faces to politics to come into this room. So I really want to give a heartfelt thank you to her. I'd like to start by clarifying two rumors. The first is that no, I don't own a yoga studio. However, I do practice yoga and meditation, and I teach a neuroscience-based mindfulness curriculum in schools that is transforming children's mental health and positive school culture. Second, yes, I do read and listen to Marianne Williamson. I don't think I'm the only one. A couple years ago, I saw her live here in Count Basie. The room was packed. And it was a year ago, I read her book called Healing the Soul of America. That was a political reawakening for me. And she spoke about how we really need to look at the root causes of our issues, not just the symptoms. And she stood for things like, yes, a reparations plan for slavery, because that is what our country is founded on, even though it's a really difficult history to revisit. And so her whole call to action was really bringing the mindfulness consciousness community, really the spiritual community, which is connected with so many other civil rights movements of our country's history back into politics. And that really was the impetus a year ago for me to start to think about what would it take to sit next to some of our progressive colleagues in Congress. The last thing I'll say there is anyone who thinks Marianne Williamson is crazy either hasn't read her work or doesn't believe that kindness and compassion is important. So I invite everyone in the room to please read that book and research her. And I bring that because there's been some comments thrown around, I think, just tends to happen. I maybe haven't been as present and visible because of several different changes happening in this field over the past few months. So just kind of want to start there with a little bit of a light note so you really know who I am. All that to say, I think it's also known that there is a assumed front runner in the room here today, particularly if you do feel like you're looking for female representation. So I would really like to tell my story simply in contrast and as an alternative to my colleague, Stephanie here, who I admire for many reasons and how she's running her campaign, as well as her experience bringing her here. So first and foremost, Stephanie is from Bergen County and moved to Little Silver for the purposes of campaigning. I grew up in Homedale. I went to Homedale High School. I have friends who went to Red Bank Regional, to RBC, CEA. I have friends with family members from Homedale to Seagirt. My mother works down the street at Leonardo Jewelers for over 10 years in Red Bank. She brought some of her colleagues here today. My grandmother's lived in Hamilton for over 20 years in the Locust Hill community. Her good friend and neighbor is the aunt of a councilman down there. And why do I say all this? I say it to say, for me, I do believe that local roots are really important because personal relationships and a connection to a place and a community are what matter. When we make policy, we need to be thinking about the people, the everyday real people and family and business owners that those policies are affecting. So I'm absolutely homegrown here in CD4. My colleague served in the Foreign Service. I studied Foreign Service at Georgetown University with renowned diplomats such as Madeleine Albright. I believe she speaks French and Portuguese, which is awesome. I speak Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese. She has a law degree from UC Berkeley. I have a graduate degree in education and social change from the University of Miami. She served our country in the State Department, which I have such admiration for. I served our country with the AmeriCorps program, which you can think of as the Domestic Peace Corps, with a program called Teach for America. I was a middle school math teacher in a community called Liberty City in Miami. During that time, a number of incredible things happened. I learned how to fail. I learned the systems of racism and the way that we fund our education. I learned what it was like to be other, being one of the 3 white people in that community of color. And I really learned what this concept of white privilege is, which is really difficult to understand when you're born into and privileged to be born into a community like Homedale. And I say that because we are in a Democratic Party primary right now, and we are meant to be representing the working class and the immigrant community and people of color. And I think we need representatives alongside people from that community themselves to run as representatives who really understand what those systemic cycles of economic injustice and social injustice look like. And through Teach for America, I have an opportunity to do that. So to continue with the contrast theme, in 2008, I know Stephanie mentioned that she was a litigator. In 2008, she defended Fortune 500 companies in IT and financial services in white-collar crimes. And in 2010, and everything I'm sharing with you is totally public on LinkedIn. You can go look at my LinkedIn as well. In 2010, she defended mid-level oil executives against BP Oil. Now, I understand when you work for a prestigious law firm, you're not cherry-picking your cases by any means. But by contrast, in 2012, I worked for the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. It's called the UN Global Compact, and I was writing handbooks, I was organizing conferences, and I was building online platforms to bring together public-private partnerships between some of the world's largest multinational corporations and UN organizations. So our organization was doing everything we could in a non-mandated regulatory way to encourage Fortune 500 companies and multinational corporations to respect labor principles, to respect basic human rights, to respect the environment and sustainability principles, and to do everything they could to fight corruption. So I was there during the time when they were actually writing the Sustainable Development Goals, and part of the reason why I support the Green New Deal, which I'm sure we'll get into detail here, is because I just feel that the United Nations response to the U.S. response to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is a massive program such as the Green New Deal that is both alleviating poverty and creating a sustainable, renewable future. So in 2017, I believe my colleague left from the State Department, similarly disillusioned as I felt in 2016, to join the Center for Reproductive Rights as a foreign policy council. In 2014, 2 years before the Trump administration, I too felt very illusioned before this catastrophic election happened. And I was in the UN at that time, and I chose to leave the United Nations because I didn't feel like we were having a meaningful impact on the issues that we said we were showing up every day to fight for. There's a little bit of that ivory tower complex working in New York on the east side, and I previously had been with my sleeves rolled up in Miami, Florida, seeing every day and helping families and children and teachers to have a bit more positive outcomes in their life. So I was really craving to get back into hands-on, face-to-face work. And so 5 years ago, I took the leap into entrepreneurship, and I created a private practice coaching business, and I primarily coach entrepreneurs and organizational leaders. It's a mix, the majority are entrepreneurs, to build confidence and courage from within. And I call it holistic business and leadership coaching because I look at someone as a whole person, not just talking about sales or just talking about health. We look at everything. So I'll end with a quick story about my longest standing client. Her name is Rita. And when she came to me 3 years ago, she found me on a matchmaking platform. And she was the director of sales of what is the equivalent of the Financial Times for the energy industry in Europe. And I coached her to become now one of the leading executive coaches for women in the energy industry. Particularly, she coaches women in, as she says, male-dominated industries. And so she's helping women find their voice and speak up and communicate in a way so that they're heard and they have influence. And I say that to say, as of 2 months ago, I am now Rita's client, because certainly politics is very male-dominated in its representation as well as its mentality. And in our work together, she coined this phrase, sustainability. And what sustainability means to her is that it's not just about equity as to why we need women in positions of power and influence. It's because the way, the female leadership style, which is about creativity and collaboration, is urgently needed for the kind of innovation and collaboration we need to solve some of our most urgent challenges. So
Do I have a minute left?
Just a little under.
1 minute, okay. So I want to leave you with a reflection in true coaching mode. And I'm going to ask your participation. If you were to say, what is the #1 biggest problem in politics today, what would it be? And just shout it out. Money. Exactly, right? The undue influence of money in politics. I just want to sit, and I'm here to just give facts so you can make an informed and intentional vote and decision. I'm not here to attack any one of my colleagues here on the stage. I'm here to wake up all of us in the room. And what I'm speaking to is really a system. So we have this undue influence of money in politics, and unfortunately, I believe it's happening in our backyard right here. And I will respect that, and I'm going to come back to it. So we'll get back to money in politics. Thank you.
Projection of how each person will work in Congress. Let's tackle the issues in a little bit. But first, let's talk about what kind of a congressperson you imagine yourself being, how you contrast with Chris Smith, different positions that he's taken that are either good, bad, indifferent, and what you would continue to do or do differently. So let me phrase that in kind of a shorter, coherent thought, and we'll rotate. So David will answer the question first.
Okay. Thank you. So if I understood correctly, it's how it'd be different than Chris Smith.
Let me, I'm going to rephrase all that stuff that I just talked about.
Oh,
okay.
Too bad.
But we will start with Chris Smith. So if nominated, you'll be running against Chris Smith in the general election. I'd like you to talk about an issue or a position or an action that he has taken that you would continue. After that, something that you really disagree with, and contrast what your position would be. Okay? And you have 2 minutes.
So it was something that I would continue doing what he does.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he's done a fair amount on some health issues, and I think that that's positive. And he's also done is known for constituent services. But I think 90,000 constituent services serving 90,000 people over 40 years. That's about that isn't all that many, and I'm sure that he's tallying them by every inquiry into his office. I'd like to raise the standard of constituent services to a whole different level. I want to have far more staff in the district. I want to have a lot more responsiveness. I've heard many, many people say that they've written to the congressman and they've not heard back. I've heard others who said, well, he was great on this point and that point, but I don't think he's not present, and his constituent services could be absolutely improved. I hope to do a lot of different things. I want to have more offices across the district. I'm working now on the idea of a mobile office that can go do house calls to actually go to people who can't get to offices. I want to have working on an NJ4 app so that we can know what actually the congressperson is doing in real time and what the issues are, so we can have straw votes and we can have a real idea. We have no idea today how we, as a congressional district, the people, the citizens, the voters, really feel about almost anything. Because he has an agenda, and he has his own sense of values, and those values belong to him and others, but I think there's a tremendous disconnect between what he wants to do in the world and what we, the voters and taxpayers, actually care about.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to choose to stand just so everyone can see.
Do you want me to repeat? Sure. If nominated, you'll be running against Chris Smith in the general election. So I'd like you to talk about an issue or position or action that he's taken that you would continue. On the other hand, talk about an issue or position or action that you really disagree with and contrast your position.
So he recently signed the CARES Act that is related to autism. And so I would support that, and I would add a prevention element to it that is speaking about a more integrative health approach of what, just deeper research tied to prevention mechanisms to prevent the rise in autism. I've met with so many mothers in my conversations throughout the district. The amount of families that I meet with children on the spectrum is incredible. I understand that the rise in chronic illness for children has gone from 12% to 54%. We need more attention on this issue, and particularly where autism fits into that, so I would add prevention. The thing where I would contrast with him is I would reauthorize the Violence Against Women's Act. I do think it's paramount. I grew up with my mother volunteering on the domestic violence team in Homedale. I have a couple personal friends who are survivors of domestic abuse in very serious cases. And so I think in the world of urgent women's issues, that would be the absolute thing that I would reauthorize and be a voice loudly, as well as in the small whispers I think we need in those halls of Congress to get the support and coalition I would need to make sure that it passes.
Great. Thank you.
No, I'm good.
Good?
Thank you.
Okay.
So Congressman Smith did some great legislation on human trafficking. However, that legislation is filled with loopholes that are due to his own biases and not the actual needs of those who have been trafficked. The bill does not protect LGBTQ+ folks. It does not protect those who have been trafficked and don't have legal status in a country. And of course, most folks who are trafficked tend to be from the most vulnerable communities. And the bill also doesn't have any provisions for reproductive health care or other health assistive services for victims. And that is absolutely critical to not just ending human trafficking, but helping the individuals who have been trafficked. One of the things that I want to do very differently from Congressman Smith is listen to folks. My campaign and I are committed to having, if I am lucky enough to be your next Congresswoman, 39 town halls throughout the district in my first term alone. That's one for every year that Congressman Smith has been in Washington not listening to us, and one for every year that I've been blessed to be on this earth and be able to do human rights advocacy work. And this is really important to me because I believe that a representative is not somebody who goes to Washington and makes decisions in a vacuum on behalf of their community, but somebody who takes the voices and concerns of their constituents that they hear and listen to regularly and amplifies them in Washington, and then comes home and is accountable for the decisions that they make. Because we will not always disagree. There are people in this room who I respect greatly, that I have different positions on issues. I am happiest to see them at events like this. I hope that they will be at regular town halls, because no representative is doing their job if they are not being pushed by members of the community on the issues that they care about and being those vocal advocates.
First for you, Christine. What areas and issues would you be open to collaborating on with your colleagues, and not just in your own party, but across the aisle?
I mean, all of them. I mean, isn't this about negotiation and compromise and finding common ground? Now, I would do that with the caveat of not compromising my values and the promises I make to my constituents. But every single issue takes dialogue, I completely agree. As a coach, I am trained in that art of deep listening, of really tuning into someone's body language, of really understanding what are they really afraid of, what do they really want here, what's personally motivating them. Often in my coaching work, what I'm helping someone do is to shift what we call a limiting belief. So before a conversation, they have these subconscious blocks to seeing a different possibility. And in our deep inquiry process, I help them reveal that gray area solution that they didn't even realize was possible before by simply shifting their attention and asking deeper, uncomfortable questions. So I am trained professionally to have really deep, authentic, uncomfortable conversations with people who don't agree with me on really important, sensitive things. And I think that process is what's necessary for every single issue on the table, particularly for the ones where we know we have representatives who are bought by corporations who are simply not doing the right thing because of corruption. I think the only way we can tackle them, other than kicking them out of office by doing great community building work in the election cycles, is to get on that human level with them and kind of speak to their heart and have them just contemplate the negative effect that the decision makes on other people's lives. And you can't force that on someone, and it will take perseverance. And just for an example, I went to the Sunrise Movement endorsement interview, and one of the questions was, how will you actually use your platform and legislation to actually move something like the Green New Deal forward? And I said, well, I would start as a nominee to meet with our Congressman Frank Pallone. And I would want to sit with him and get to know him and really understand what's going through his head. I'm sure there's a bunch of reasons why pragmatically he's not being a champion for it. And I said in that interview that I would go again and again and again. It takes perseverance and it takes relationship building. And I am trained in relationship building.
Thank you. What areas or issues would you be open to collaborating on with your colleagues, Democrat and Republican?
Sure. I think there are two key areas that need the most immediate attention in the next Congress, and that is campaign finance reform, and then the second issue is national security and the whole host of issues that flow from a national security democracy strengthening standpoint for both the U.S. and our partners around the world. From the campaign finance reform standpoint, I'm not accepting corporate PAC money. I am not accepting fossil fuel money. I believe that Dred Scott, Citizens United, I've done this twice now, flip it. Citizens United was the worst Supreme Court decision since Dred Scott. And I know that the criticisms have been levied about the amount of money that I've raised in this race. I am raising this money so that I can go to Washington. I'm raising the money so that I can win. And I'm doing it $1 at a time for people across this district. Sometimes a little more than $1, but there are clear limits. It's all transparent and online. And the reality is that you have to win elections in the system that you are given, and then you go and change that system. And so that is my commitment. But by not taking corporate PAC money and not taking fossil fuel money, I am not beholden to interests other than those in our district and you all, the only folks I want to represent. On a national security standpoint, it is absolutely critical that we collaborate with our colleagues across the aisle to enact common sense reforms designed to rein in the U.S.'s impulse to go to war first and engage in diplomacy second. We are reaping the benefits of decades of foreign policy that have prioritized military engagement overseas at the expense of diplomacy in the field. And I have seen that firsthand. There are a number of folks who've been elected to office in recent years, including Congresswoman Cheryl Kim and Malinowski, and I'd like to work with those folks and those veterans in the Republican Party to make sure that we're prioritizing our national security and democracy in a diplomacy-first manner.
Thank you. The aisle. I'm going to talk about another aisle first. I was sitting on the aisle of the NJ Transit from Newark Airport to Red Bank, and I sat down next to a woman, and we had a conversation. She works for Con Ed in the city, and she's a Republican, and she's a Catholic, and she's a single mom, has 2 teenage kids. And I said I was running for Congress, and I gave her my little flyer as a Democrat, and we had an hour to talk. and we got on quite well. Actually, I found that if you find and you drill down to and you ask questions and you're non-judgmental, I even said, well, I said, you probably voted for Chris Smith, and she said, I probably did. And we went back and forth, and then we talked about her kids, and we talked about Freehold. She actually lives in Freehold, and she, at the end of that, she said, I'm going to vote for you. And then we saw, and it wasn't about politics. It was about being real. It was about listening. It was about caring. It was about having contact. And then the other thing about the aisle, I think it's the same thing in Congress. Not with everybody, but with a lot. If you have your moral compass straight, and you don't judge, and you find the deeper values, and you make compelling arguments based on that, and you find that you can satisfy the other person's needs, they'll be less likely to have to be in the pocket of a particular lobby if you give them other compelling reasons that help their constituents and their local businesses, but in a different way. So we need to replace greed with good solutions, with good, strong, compelling business models that help the politicians not be dependent on the money. I haven't taken any fossil fuel money either, but I'll tell you the truth, no one's offered me any.
David, you're up first for the next question. And this should be not a real long answer, but who in the House of Representatives would you say is your role model of the kind of congressperson you want to be?
I'll tell you, I was in tears watching Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff, he gave it everything. He said, if we cannot convince the goodness of the institution and the goodness of the people to see that all we're asking for is sharing the truth, not the conclusions, I thought he was absolutely brilliant, because it was a brilliant argument. It was smart, but it was also came from the heart. So I would say today, Adam Schiff.
Thank you.
I'm going to break the rules and say, too, I really admire Nancy Pelosi because I met her, oh my God, 10 years ago now at a Georgetown function. I just got an email today re-inviting me. She's doing another event. Just being an Italian woman, I really connect with her leadership. But who really, it was the second person who inspired me to research what would it take to sit next to her in Congress, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Mostly because she transcended money and politics. She got people. She built a model. And it wasn't just her. There's a number of other people and Justice Democrats. She inspired and empowered people. That's how she did what she did. There's a great book written by Ryan Grant. And it says, we got people. We have so many people in this room, throughout the district, throughout our towns. If we're just willing to connect with them and speak with them and ask them to support us, that's why my grassroots fundraising goal is $40 from 4,000 people. I'd rather spend time speaking to people and getting votes at the same time getting resources to run a really awesome professional campaign. So that's why I really admire Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Like Christina, I have two women that I admire greatly in Congress. A rising senior leader, Representative Catherine Clark from Massachusetts. I had the great privilege of working with Representative Clark on my bill over the past 2 years, and she epitomizes the work ethic that I think is necessary to be a Democrat in Congress. She is not the flashiest or showiest congresswoman, but day in and day out, she is meeting with every member of the caucus to whip votes and find out people's issue positions and doing all that hard work that allows the rest of the leadership team to shine as the vice chair of the caucus. And I respect her advocacy on reproductive rights and her fearlessness greatly. And then the other person, the freshman representative that I most admire, is Katie Porter. Katie Porter is just an incredible American, a woman who fled a violent, abusive relationship, became a single parent with 3 children while being a law professor in California and running for Congress, whose opponent attacked her for being a victim of domestic violence, her fellow Democratic opponent on the campaign trail. And for me, there is no place in those ad hominem attacks. I will never speak to what somebody else's life story or experience is, because it's not my place. I will tell my story and my experience. But those of you that don't know Katie, she grilled some banking executives and schooled them in what it means to actually shop for groceries and balance a budget and be a working mother. And we just need more folks in Washington, D.C. who understand what it is to live a real life.
Of the forum, and we'll start with Christine. Christine, if you knew you could get just one piece of the Green New Deal through that house on your first day there, which one would it be and why?
So I would get the Medicare for All passed, which is under the massive umbrella of the Green New Deal. So Medicare for All is actually written into the Green New Deal resolution. There's several different programs. I didn't know it either until I read it in full. I encourage you all to read it in full. Since that is its own policy point, after that, I would, there's so many different, obviously everything about renewable energy transition. We would have to set a date to phase out fossil fuels. I do believe that we can become renewable by 2030. It's a really multifaceted program. So I would say renewable, solar, and wind energy second, right after Medicare for All.
Stephanie, right? You guys have to help me out.
We've lost track. We will do whatever you tell us. For me, I think I would want to focus on infrastructure, and that is because, I believe it's most pressing because it has been the least invested upon for decades upon decades. And I believe that our crumbling infrastructure, including our electric grid, are a national security issue that are vulnerable to attack. So we need to not just shore up our crumbling roads and ports and bridges and grid. We need to modernize and safeguard against attacks from other foreign powers who have already attempted to hack into that infrastructure. I think that's critical. And through that renewal and investment in everything from high-speed rail to secure ports, we will also be investing in modern technology, clean technology, and new jobs.
Yes, I was going to say infrastructure as well, because I believe that we need to renew our roads, our transportation, our safety, and our water supply. Water in this state is really under siege, and it's being underreported, and it's water and pipeline and runoff and pollution is key. But I wanted to say one thing in conclusion, is that the problem with as I see it, with the Green New Deal is that it's been attacked for reasons that seem really invalid. So I think we need to change the language and the labels that we use when we talk about many things, because things have been framed in a way so that they become enemies when they're actually in our complete national interest and have no partisan attachment at all. And the Green New Deal is one of them. And those I've heard who attack the Green New Deal, for me it was like attacking the 10 Commandments. You know, it was like, this is an idea, this is a vision, this isn't legislation. So we need to break that down into many things, into fuel and infrastructure and the different component parts, and share that and communicate with our public and our voters according to those particular issues.
Thank you. We're going to stick with the day one scenario. If you knew you could get one piece of health care reform through on day one, which one would it be and why?
This is tough. But I do believe that prescription drugs are the absolutely essential place to start, and the House has passed that legislation, specifically legislation that empowers the federal government without limits to directly negotiate the price of prescription drugs, because I cannot bear to live in a world where somebody dies from insulin rationing because drug company executives are allowed to mark up the price of drugs astronomically after patents and limitations expire. And so I think correlated to that is a piece of legislation that specifically is assessing how we fund drug research in this country, how we give companies tax incentives and patents and exclusives on critical life-saving prescription drugs. I mean, every drug you can think of, for the most part, has been invented here in the United States, deployed overseas at a fraction of the cost to save millions of lives around the world. And I think of all the HIV drugs that have just, changed the reality of people living throughout sub-Saharan Africa through our PEPFAR program. And we too need to be the beneficiary of that research and innovation and controlling the cost, because the solution is not to import drugs from Canada that we've already shipped there at a lower price. It is for us to control, we the people, the system, and not drug company executives. And Congress owes an oversight responsibility. Those folks need to be called to task and held accountable publicly in hearings. And one of the greatest things I'm looking forward to, if I'm blessed to be a representative, is engaging in ongoing oversight on a number of issues where you get to see the hearings and you get to see the person who chose to mark up the price of insulin and kill our children testify before Congress about what their priorities are and what their profits were last quarter.
Day one, it's going to be a long day because H.R. 3 that got through the House has been attacked by H.R. 19, which is a piece of propaganda basically to make us believe that Americans are going to lose access to the diversity of drugs and research, but it actually is supported by a lobby that's just trying to block the reduction of prescription drug prices. I would also introduce legislation about the pharmaceutical advertising agency industry. $29 billion is spent every year on 660,000 television ads. You've all seen them over and over and over in slow motion with fast talk at the end. That's at the same time we have like one drug, Humira. It's registered 247 patent applications with the aim of delaying competition for 39 years. So we know that there's enough money around, but it's being spent in an immoral way. Additionally, in that same piece of legislation, I'm going to need some help writing it, is going to be how to legislate about pharmacy benefit managers that negotiate on behalf of the Medicare beneficiaries in a completely secretive and hidden manner, so we don't know anything about the rebates, the kickbacks, and all the rest. This is a subject that I'm passionate about. I spent a lot of time figuring out, working on, and I've been consulting with leaders in this area. In New Jersey, there is 100% tax credit for the pharmaceutical companies on research and development. R&D. So when you hear that the cost of medication is so high because of R&D, we're paying the R&D. Anyway, so this is something I'm going to be an advocate for, and I've had the privilege of living in a number of other countries that are named in H.R. 3. They make it make you afraid that this is coming from other countries. You know, the countries that they're comparing to is France, England, Germany, Australia, Canada, Switzerland. These are the countries where the health systems work. You know, so I would push for HR 3.
I have to be honest, when I hear all of these different facets of healthcare with all different, proposals, it just feels like a bunch of symptoms, and the root cause is a for-profit healthcare system, which is why the first thing I would do is everything in my power to pass Medicare for all. And if we're thinking forward, I do believe that Senator Sanders will win the nomination and will be the only person who can beat Donald Trump. So that is not a pie-in-the-sky dream. It's a real possibility. That's exactly what's on his desk in the first 100 days. And why do I support that? For several reasons. One, obviously, healthcare is a human right, but I also think that the ability to choose your job is a human right, and it's ridiculous in this country that we tie our healthcare to benefits from our job. That's just a way to keep power in corporations. And every time universal healthcare has come up in our history, it's been the same corporate lobbies that have shut it down. So I think this would be a huge boost in entrepreneurship and in small business, and that is what creates thriving local economies that actually affects and improves our lives right here in CD4. And the other reason why I significantly prioritize it is because in the Medicare for All bill, there is a section that would cover integrative healthcare. Integrative healthcare includes non-pharmaceutical healing modalities, supplements, nutrition that we know can help prevent and heal disease. And this is hitting home right now with my mother and her cancer journey right now. We're paying $10,000 extra out of pocket for an integrative approach to put together with standard of care chemotherapy. And I had to do all the work, we had to do all the work to find those doctors, a doctor out in Colorado. And in 2 treatments, her cancer marker is in the normal range. And some professionals say it's miraculous. That should be available to everybody, not just someone with a daughter who happens to be in holistic health for many years, or happens to be from Homedale, New Jersey, where we have the resources to put out the extra 10 grand, after already putting out 10 grand for chemotherapy. That is immoral, and we can change that with one bill.
We in Red Bank are truly blessed to have people living among us, friends, brothers and sisters, who are here, were brought to this country when they were children. For them, the issues that we're talking about are not philosophical, they're not someday, they're right now. Their lives, their tomorrows depend on steps that one of you will take in the House of Representatives. So I'd like to talk about some questions, talk about some issues with immigration. First of all, I'd like to know your overall approach to immigration enforcement. And by that I mean funding for ICE and for the Border Patrol. Who's up next? Stephanie, go ahead.
So I've been blessed to be able to do work on multiple sides of the immigration issue throughout my career in the federal judiciary, as an attorney working in refugee and asylum clinics, and also as somebody who adjudicated visas at the State Department, made decisions about who got to come to the US under what visa. And so I have a pretty good understanding of what works with our system, and an even better understanding of all of its failures. And it really does all have to do with the fact that we haven't had comprehensive immigration reform in decades and decades. These are bills that were cobbled together in the middle of the 20th century and have not been reformed since then. So we need a wholesale comprehensive revision. Protecting DACA recipients and dreamers is non-negotiable. It's a baseline of what we need to do. I'm very supportive of the policy that Attorney General Gruhl has put into place, saying that our limited local and state resources will not be used to supplement ICE interdiction efforts in our counties. I think that's right because I agree with the approach taken under the Obama administration on illegal immigrant deportation, which is as follows. If you have committed a violent crime in the United States, murder, rape, you have served your sentence, I believe that you should be deported after that. And then I think that's where most of our resources can and should go. Most of the people that are here illegally simply failed to adjust their status. It was a lack of information. It is a system that is stressed to the point of breaking. And we have attorneys that take advantage every day of people and take their money and say they're filing their adjusted status, and they don't. We have a system where if you get a job and adjust your status after you're here as a student, it's very easy to do if you understand, but it's very difficult if you don't. And so I really want to focus on making this country and this system what it is, which is a country that's core and root is immigrants coming here from all over the world and staying here and growing and working.
I'm very sensitive to this point. Recently I went to visit I found the tombstone of my great-grandfather in Perth Amboy. First, I didn't know where he was, and I found him. And I was thinking about how, he showed up in Ellis Island, lived in Brooklyn. He didn't have any papers. He was an undocumented immigrant. And then I thought about other people in the family, and my mother had come on a Salvation Army chartered boat and arrived in 1947. She didn't have any papers, and I thought this is really a moral issue, and we need to address this. We need to sensitize and talk in our communities in a different way, because it's horrible how we have our citizens against their own citizens, as if we've been faced with an otherness, as if that is the problem. It is really very distressing. So I think we need to obviously have a path to citizenship for immigrants in the country, and I thought about that very seriously. I agree that our immigration system has to be rethought. I've worked in 35 countries in Africa and the Middle East, and I see the way that we have to change the way that what we communicate to the rest of the world about our receptivity to others, especially since our entire fabric of our entire culture and country was based on these principles. And when now things have changed, people seem to have forgotten and are blaming newcomers. And I think the ethnocentricity that we've allowed to overcome much of the mindset of our towns and our people is so we need to work on the cultural side and the legal side. When I've seen the dragnets on Route 35, I've seen the difficulty when I'm going around door to door, the fear of my neighbors to open their doors. I said, this has to stop.
To have several close relationships with immigrant friends in my life. I am a third-generation Italian American. There was a time when Italians were also not treated amicably in this country. I do feel like because of that, and there is a large Italian population here in CD4, on this particular issue, I can sit eye to eye. I do happen to know fellow Italians who forget where our people came from, also without papers. But just to give a little bit more, and the reason why I'm saying this is because I said earlier, I think being connected to the people behind policy is really important. My first boyfriend from Brazil was an immigrant. We met when I was living in Miami, and he was denied his visa twice back to the US with no known reason. It might be even part of the reason why we're not together today. I actually haven't seen him since I left Brazil. My current partner now is an immigrant from Germany. My roommate is an immigrant from Haiti. Yesterday, some papers arrived for her to renew the special visa that she got in the aftermath of the hurricane. So these are really, really special policies, and I know people who they affect, who negatively are affected by them, as well as allows them to come here and study and be a nurse, studying to be a nurse practitioner. So all that to say, I think that we should defund ICE. I do think that we should decriminalize the border. I do support putting a halt on deportations until we do a complete audit of our immigration system. I completely agree with what Stephanie's saying, and can imagine that it's not just bad actors and evil people, that the system is just completely overwhelmed. But this is where everything becomes interconnected. I think we should look at the Green New Deal, which we know is a massive infrastructure project that requires skilled labor, high-paid union jobs, look at all the needs we need to implement that over the next 10 years, and then look at our immigration policy and integrate that together, because we all know, and for some of us who are fine with an immigrant serving us in a restaurant, but we're not going to allow them to have access to equal education, is obviously hypocrisy. So I would support that we use the Green New Deal as a guide to upgrade our immigration system.
Questions before we wrap up, so you can do your wrap-ups. And I guess based on your answers to that question and some things that have not been addressed nationwide in the political debate this year, I'm wondering, how do you plan to connect on a really policy level and visceral level with the Black and brown communities in CD4? Obviously, none of you are people of color. Are you going to have people of color on your advisory committees? Do you have people you listen to? What are your plans for really connecting and trying to pass legislation that might make a difference? And we'll start with Christina.
Okay. If you are a person of color in the room and you came here by my invitation today, raise your hand. Okay, there's a handful. So yes, I do have a team of advisors and volunteer leaders who are people of color for not even a strategic reason. That just seems to be who I am. I just attract diversity. And it's likely because of the number of different professional experiences that I share with you all, particularly my experience in AmeriCorps with Teach for America. This is why I think that having deep local roots is so important. I currently live in Ocean Grove in Neptune Township. Just a couple days ago, through a friend of a friend, as I'm reaching out to these other community groups, I met two gentlemen, Damon and Aaron, who are from Neptune Township, and I asked them, will you give me a tour of the other side of Neptune that I don't personally know through a local lens. A couple months ago, I actually applied for a Board of Education position there. I didn't get it, and the person who got it definitely deserved it. But there are ways in which I'm seeking to be involved in that community. I think that's one of our largest community of color in CD4. I don't think I need to tap the Spanish skills everywhere, but I do have that ability to speak the Spanish language and connect on that level. I'm not going to pull a Beto O'Rourke right now and give you some Espanol, but it comes down to spending time in those communities. And what I want to say in the immigration policy question was, it's on my very urgent to-do list to meet with our colleague, Itzel Hernandez over here, who coaches and advises candidates and elected officials on immigration policy. And I hope if I miss anything out that you're going to tell me exactly what I need to know and what is best going to serve and protect this community here.
Well, on Martin Luther King Day, I attended Friday night services at the Monmouth Reformed Temple with the Pilgrim Baptist Church, and it was so moving to see neighbors sharing Jewish and Christian music and prayer and songs and locking arms and having people that I didn't know welcomed into that congregation, coming up and saying Shabbat Shalom. And I was going, this is so much stronger than what we're seeing in Washington, and this is the power of community. We have to bring people together. We have to share experiences. We have to meet. We have to mix. We have to eat together. We have to dance together. We have to we have to just step through those boundaries and borders. My wife and I live right at the D. Thomas Fortune House in Red Bank, right behind it, and I got to know Dr. Walter Grayson, and I'm gotten connected with the traditions and the history of African American communities in the district. We need to make conscious efforts to change our habits, to bring people into our homes, to invite people, to go into neighborhoods we don't usually do. Otherwise, these borders, these boundaries, these divisions are going to continue. And I think that is, so it takes a personal commitment and lots more programs and ideas. I've also become a member of the Zion Episcopal Church. I go to on Sunday mornings to listen to Pastor Janet. I'm the only white person that attends that church. There are two churches of the same denomination in the same town, and there's not even a mixture between the two churches. We have to take those personal risks and be an example to everybody else.
That needs to be asked of every candidate that's running, because our legislature is too white. It is not representative of America now, and it's not representative of the America that is going to be. But for me, in addition to going into spaces and meeting people where they are, and I agree, going into churches and community centers, getting out of democratic clubs and other more traditionally privileged and white spaces is important, is talking about issues that matter. And so every policy issue that I'm thinking about from a racial justice standpoint. And that's because I have had the privilege of working in the reproductive justice movement. And the reproductive justice movement is a little bit different than the reproductive rights movement. It centers the experience of women of color, and it focuses on policies like repealing the Hyde and Helms Amendment and making sure that access to abortion is not something that just privileged white women who live in coastal states have. And so whether we're talking about immigration reform or criminal justice reform or reproductive justice or LGBTQ rights, I think it's just important to always have that policy component and continually talk to people in those communities about what their priorities are. And I think across the issues that we've discussed tonight, there are specific racial justice components. And the experience that I had, certainly working in the criminal justice system on the defense side, is one where people of color are given sentences that are incredibly disproportionate and punitive to white individuals who have committed the same crimes. One of the hardest cases as a young lawyer for me was seeing a woman, a mother from China, locked up for 3 decades for committing immigration offenses, where her next door neighbor, the Bureau of Immigration Affairs white male official, received a slap on the wrist for participating in the same immigration fraud ring. And we just really need to call out those moments every time we see it and be vociferous advocates and witnesses to the injustices in our country.
And the final question. If you are not nominated, will you support the nominee for the Democratic primary for CD4? Let's start with you, Stephanie.
Absolutely. This one's been asked before. Yes, and I would like to offer my leadership coaching skills.
I think it is so important that we beat Donald Trump in November, and that we show Chris Smith the door, that anything to that end, I think, is going to be an honorable and a impassioned direction to take. So.
Two more things. I'm going to start passing the basket around. Our bank account is dangerously low, and even though the Two River Theater is very generous to us, it's not free, and we do have expenses. So I'll pass this out, and then the candidates will have time to give their closing statement. Just 3 minutes from each one. So we can get started. Get your money out, and then give you a couple of minutes. I always say that it takes my son a while to open up his wallet because he has to let all the moths fly out. Okay, so. Okay, Stephanie, you have gone first for the introductions. So Christine, you were number 3, so let's start with you for the wrap-up. You have 3 minutes.
So thank you so much again for your time and attention. Wait a second until the bag gets done really fast. I can feel people's energy and attention. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to pick up where I started or where I left off in my introduction. So what is the biggest problem in politics today? Money. Exactly. And what I got rushed and want to say is, what I'm about to say is not to tear down anyone here on the stage, it's to wake up all of us here. But I believe that campaign finance reform can start today here in our community. Everything is public, right? If you go to the FEC contributions, and I'm just going to speak to the system that I believe is happening in our backyard. And I do admire the ability to raise over $200,000. But if you look at those numbers, and I'm going to talk about $100,000 and above, because I think anyone should be able to donate to different campaigns across the U.S. But there's something about $1,000 and above that just feels like it's extra influential. And if you look at contributions, 1,000 of those contributions for Stephanie's campaign came out of the state. I'm sorry, 85% of $1,000 and above came out of state. 15% are from New Jersey, and 0.03% are from CD4. That is just symptomatic of our system, and I do believe you when you say you're just raising money to get in the game. I philosophically think the reverse. I think we should be spending our time and our attention building relationships in CD4 simultaneously, raising money. Now, by contrast, I've raised by December 31st somewhere in the realm of $10,000. About $7,200 of it is also, itemized on FEC. 65% of that was from New Jersey, and 25% was from CD4. Now, I have substantially lower numbers, so it's not an exact fair comparison. But I think it just shows with a grassroots approach, genuinely grassroots, and being from this community, having those connections in Hamilton and Red Bank and Homedale and Ocean Grove and Neptune, I really do believe, and my team is working, and my team is actually a team of 40 plus volunteers that are all new to politics, that we can get 4,000 people to donate $40 just to start. And why 40? Because it's fun. My name is Conforti. 2020 equals 40, right? It's a really easy ask. So the coach in me just looks at the system and says, it doesn't have to be this way. Yes, we need sweeping campaign finance reform, but we don't have to wait until then. I'm here because I empower people. That's the work that I do. And I'm here to empower citizen engagement. And there's so many things that we can do to tap the resources that are in our community. Because when I think of someone who has $1,000, who's willing and able to put that money somewhere in an election that's not in their community, I ask questions like, what does that say about them? What are their intentions or agenda? What are their expectations? These are really real things. This is where money in politics and corruption comes from. I'm not calling anyone corrupt here. I'm just speaking to a system. And so I think I invite all of us to really contemplate what's possible if we start to hold our candidates accountable to truly grassroots type of fundraising in the here and now. Thank you so much. People and planet are greater than profit. That is the campaign slogan. I appreciate your time.
Hi. So, we as a community must define what it means to be citizens here. What defines us? What brings us together? What we mean when we talk about our values. As a candidate for Congress, I'm ready to revitalize what it means to be your representative. To me, that means being here, digging in, being present, working to find creative solutions that are inspired by both social justice and economic potential. We must act on climate change. We must employ new opportunities to protect and preserve our environment and our safety. We must set into motion new ways to tackle the healthcare crisis. And as a father and former educator myself, I know how important it is to prioritize our children's education and ensure affordable paths to college and to sustainable careers. It starts with paying our teachers what they deserve and ensuring they have the resources to change a child's life. As a communications professional, I listen to complex problems. I use my business experience and global background to work on real solutions to combat real local issues. Tonight, we've talked about some of the issues. It's time we talk about the solutions. I know that together we can transform our district. We can take a stand for our larger community. We can use our talent. We can support our local economy, local and small businesses, family-run businesses, local banks and credit unions, and we can build a proud sense of identity in a shared vision for NJ4. We can transform ideas into brilliant results. I want to thank our host tonight, the Greater Red Bank Women's Initiative, who worked so hard to put together this amazing event. I want to thank Christina and Stephanie for your thoughtful comments. I thank my campaign team who are here tonight ready to meet you. And I thank my wife, Julia, who's right there, for her full-hearted support. You have to be a little bit special to be married to a candidate. Lastly, I thank you all for being here and participating as engaged citizens. I'm honored to be working to earn your vote. I'll be sticking around to talk a little bit more about the issues that matter most to you. And as I really like to say, and I keep repeating, we can fix this if we talk. Thank you.
Oh boy, my dirty little secret's out. Christine, I am a decade older than you, so I'm just gonna say, I have a longer list of ex-boyfriends. Unfortunately, they are very generous, though non-New Jersey dwelling friends and supporters of mine. So I wanna talk a little bit about strategy here to wrap up, because we've talked about a lot of great ideas, but the one thing that really unites us all up here is our desire to flip this seat and beat Chris Smith in November, and that's why we're here. It's also why I'm running. I have been running a professional campaign with a full-time staff of now 4 people as of today since the very beginning. I have attended candidates training camp at school, at Emily's List, at the Yale Women's Campaign School, at the George Washington School of Public Service, and I was invited by our party to Battleground Candidates Boot Camp in October, the only person in the state of New Jersey invited to that training based on the strength of the campaign that I'm running. And why am I running that campaign? Because it is going to literally take every single dollar we have, every canvasser, every resource, every person in this room to beat Chris Smith, and that is the goal. That is the only goal. And I believe that I am the candidate best positioned to put together and have already put together that winning strategy. And so a little bit about our district. We need 70% of registered Democratic voters to turn out and vote in this election for the Democrat running, any one of the 3 of us. And then we need 70% other. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that we need to reach across the aisle. We need to be talking to people in churches and in grocery stores. We need to talk to our neighbors who are Republicans. We need to talk to our neighbors who are independents. They just released a big study that shows that Monmouth County, and in fact most of this district, unaffiliated, unregistered, independent voters outnumber both Democrats and Republicans 2-to-1 in this district. and we're about even on Republican and Democrat. And so I firmly believe that we need to be running a campaign that is able to talk to people who do not agree with us on some of these issues. And I feel very comfortable doing that because I've spent my lifetime as a diplomat walking into rooms where I share nothing in common with people, including a language. And I have had very hard conversations. The issue of abortion, I think it's very clear how important being pro-choice is to me, but reasonable people can disagree on that issue. What is not okay is for your personal belief system and values to be imported into the healthcare delivery room of another woman. It is her right and her right alone to decide how to make that choice and who involved. And that is the approach that I take to a lot of policy issues. A human rights lens, one that says we don't get to pick and choose whose rights are valued and prioritized, one that focuses on every member of this community, one that brings us together. I am ready to lead from day one. I have written legislation. I have relationships in this community and on the Hill. And together, we can flip this seat. But it will take everything we have. 40 people donating $40, 4,000 people donating $40 is just not enough to get the job done.
Schmid, Conforti, and David Applefield. What a wonderful night, and better than any office to have in the audience. The candidates will be over in there, in that area, with their staff, so if you'd like to talk to them, take up some information, that would be great. Tickets are being sold for the lunch and fashion show, so if you're interested, it's at the Oyster Point this coming Sunday. Do that. And a personal thank you